Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Samantha Leighanne and I'm spilling my coffee. Actually, I just talk about books. Welcome to my February wrap up. After this time last year, not really doing so well in terms of reading, I'm real proud of myself for how much I am reading right now. As I'm filming this is actually the end of March. Because I'm just absolutely terrible. I'm in the middle of quarantine. I have been out of work for a whole week and I am slowly but surely losing my mind. So let's just go ahead and talk about the books that I read in the month of February. In February, I was really kind to myself in the types of books that I was reading. I have really, just to avoid any slumps, I have just really allowed myself to read whatever I feel like reading at the time. I'm not like, oh, I should be reading more of this, or I should be reading more of, this particular genre or whatever. I am just like, this is what I feel like reading today, so this is what I'm gonna do. One of the many reasons that TBRs have just never really worked for me. So for the month of February, I read a total of 8 books, which is a total of 2,664 pages, which doesn't sound like a lot, but there were a couple of audiobooks in there. And of the 8 books that I read, 4 of them were actually rereads. So they're rereads, but they're rereads that I haven't talked about on this channel before. So, it's kind of new content for you guys. It's stuff that I read way forever ago. 6 of those books were physical and 2 were audiobooks, which means 6 of them were books that were from my own shelves. I am so proud of myself for how much I have read off my own shelves lately. And then the 2 audiobooks were for my library. Star breakdown, I had 2 5-star reads this month. I had 4 4-star reads, so it was a pretty decent month. And then 1 3 and 1 2-star. So kind of, pretty all over the place. And then as far as author gender, I had 2 female and 4 male authors. So, and then as far as genre goes, I did read 3 horror, 1 thriller, and then 4 fantasy, which I generally don't read a ton of fantasy. All right, so without anything further, let's just jump right into the books that I read. Okay, so the first book that I'm gonna talk about is Stranded by Bracken MacLeod. And I had never read anything by this author before until I read this book. One of my favorite horror films is actually The Thing by John Carpenter. I flippin' love that movie, and this book had a lot of those vibes from The Thing, right? You have a boat full of people that are on their way to resupply an oil platform, I'm pretty sure is what it was, somewhere close to the Arctic Circle. And so there's ice and they run upon this storm and they get stuck, right? But they get stuck to a point where they can see the platform that they're trying to get to. And as they're getting further, everybody starts getting sick, really sick, and nobody knows why everybody is getting so sick. But there's one person, I think, on that crew that's completely immune. And so he is kind of leading the charge, I guess, to get everybody to the other platform to try and get help, right? And I don't want to say too much more than that as far as plot goes, but it's not very long. The pacing in this was really good. Again, it definitely gave me vibes of The Thing, which was really nice. Just the setting and the overall atmosphere of it. There was a lot of distrust at one point among the crew members as each of them are getting sick and they don't understand why, as well as what happens further on in the plot that just fosters more and more of that distrust, and you never really know who anybody is and that kind of thing. I will say it's not aliens, so don't go into it thinking that exactly. This being my first experience with Bracken MacLeod's writing, he's a name that I see very often within the horror community, and so after having read this, I am really excited to read his other works. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I wasn't totally enthralled with it. It didn't wow me to the point of oh my god, this is the best book ever, but I did find it very enjoyable. Like I said, I would definitely read more of his writing. I did decide to pick up my next book in my King Chronicles journey, and this is the one that I was so excited to get to because this was my very first Stephen King that I ever read, and that was Pet Sematary. Again, this is going to get its own video, and I know that I have said that many times about some of the books that I have, talked about in wrap-ups and things like that. I think I had this rated on Goodreads originally as a 4-star because I read this a long time before Goodreads ever existed, but I changed this rating to 5 stars because I loved this book. book. The feeling of dread that's built throughout, because having read this before, I do know what happens, and I do feel like most people know the plot of this just in general. You know, sometimes dead is butter or whatever. Just, you know, the atmosphere that he creates throughout this book is just so fucking good, and I loved it so much. So this was one of my 5-star reads this month. So one of the things that I really decided to do this month was really just go for something that was comforting. I got in my head that I wanted to, and I've actually been thinking about rereading this series for quite a while, so I was glad that I finally decided to pick it up, and that's the Abarat series by Clive Barker. But I do have a love-hate relationship with Clive Barker. There are some of his works that I absolutely adore, and then other ones that I've really hated. This is more along the lines of a YA fantasy, but it does still have some like horror elements to it, as we've come to expect from Clive Barker. Things that are noticeably absent, obviously, because this is YA. There is, you know, that sexual element that is absent from this, which I was not mad about at all. But this is a story about a young teenager. I want to say she's like 13 or something. She's like 13 or 14 maybe. I can't remember. But her name is Candy Quackenbush, and she lives in Chickentown, USA. She feels in her soul that there is something greater out there, and one day, due to unforeseen circumstances, she is swept up by a sea, even though she is in the middle of, you know, like Iowa or Nebraska. I'm pretty sure it's Nebraska. I think she's in the middle of Nebraska. She's swept away by a sea into the Abarat, where every island in the Abarat is a different time of day. And you come to meet this cast of characters, and one of the things that Clive Barker is really good with is his descriptiveness of the characters that appear within this book. This particular edition that I have for the first book is just like the straight paperback. This cover illustration is actually a illustration of one of the characters, Christopher Carrion, who is our main antagonist, but this cover illustration was done by Barker himself. The other two editions that I have, which I'm actually just going to talk about the series as a whole while I'm talking about this, the other two editions that I have are actually fully illustrated, and they are absolutely beautiful. So Candy gets to the Abarat and realizes that she is there because she is meant to help save the Abarat from, you know, things that are happening. And so that's the basic plot of the book, of the series in general. From my understanding, this is a series that is not finished yet. Originally, it was supposed to be a trilogy, which 3 of the books are published, but from my understanding, I want to say that they're supposed to be 4 or 5 books actually, but also I don't think that Clive Barker has been in great health as of late, and so he hasn't been working on this. The rest of the series has no release date, which if it ended with the 3rd book, I don't think that it would be the worst thing ever. I just love the descriptiveness of the series. I love the way that Barker is really able to take you out of our world and transport you into the Abarat, as well as just in general his writing. I honestly think that this is my favorite thing that I've ever read by Clive Barker, Hellbound Heart included. I love the Hellbound Heart for what it is, but I just love the descriptiveness of the series. It's so fun and it's so whimsical and out there. And again, there are these like more horrific type elements that are kind of sprinkled throughout the series as a whole, but it's just so excellently done. And like I said, there is the 2nd book in the series, which is Days of Magic and Nights of War, which I also have, and this is again illustrated by him. I can't remember what character this is. So I do have those 2 in paperback. I actually do have the 2nd edition. I forgot that I had the 2nd book in the illustrated edition, but this is the 1st edition of the 3rd Absolute Midnight. So again, we have this beautiful cover illustration, but more than that, not only is this particular edition, it has like the shiny glossy pages, it is also illustrated by Barker throughout. That's one of the characters, John Mischief. Like, I loved the illustrations. Being able to go through and read this with the illustrations, and then most of the sections begin with like these little poem pieces. And I just, I loved it. I love this series so much, and I really, really love this edition. One of my favorite fantasy series, one of my favorite young adult series, and one of my favorite books in general from Clive Barker. So So the next book that I'm going to talk about is The Butterfly Girl by Rene Denfeld. And this is actually the sequel to The Child Finder, which made my best books of 2019 list. I will link that up above in the cards if you are so inclined to check that out. While I really love The Child Finder, and while I did enjoy The Butterfly Girl, I did not love it quite as much. So if you're unfamiliar with The Child Finder, it follows Naomi Cottle, she was a found child. She doesn't know her past. She doesn't know where she came from. She knows that she was abducted as a child, and she did manage to escape. And towards the end of The Child Finder, she makes it a mission to try and find her sister, who was also abducted with her, but she escaped without her. And so this book mostly actually does follow her efforts to try and find her sister, while also really exploring the idea of homelessness and child abuse, especially child victims of rape and molestation. And there's a lot of very, very heavy topics within this. If that is something that you have a hard time reading about, I do not recommend picking this up by any stretch of the imagination. The Child Finder, while it did deal with some abusive topics, there wasn't really as much of a sexual element, and there is here. It does go into depth about how sometimes the system really does fail children of child abuse, especially in the cases of like parents and step parents and things like that. It's very, very heavy stuff, but it is very well written. While again, I didn't enjoy it as much as I did The Child Finder, the pacing was very fluid, and so it kept the story moving. I didn't feel like it was too long or too short. I don't want to say it didn't feel like it was too long or too short, but I feel like Denfeld really wrote this book because she really needed to finish the story of Naomi and, really kind of have her come into her own, which I do feel like she did. So there's that, but 4 stars. I did really like it. The next book that I read was Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter. I read her short story collection, The Bloody Chamber, which I loved. Very dark fairy tales, feminist vibes, definitely horror. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And so I did pick up a couple other works by her, and I gotta tell y'all, I did not enjoy this very much at all. I don't know if it was because of the way that it was written, and I did go back and forth between the physical copy that I have in my hand, and I did listen to parts of it on audio, and I did not enjoy the audio, and I think that could have been one of the things that kept me from enjoying it, but also just the story as a whole didn't grab me as much as I was anticipating that it would. One of the things that Angela Carter is known for is like not just like horror, but feminism and things like that, which was very pervasive through this book. However, the main character of this book is a woman who is part human and part swan. So you have that, like fantasy element. And she works for Circus, and that's all I'm really gonna tell you. I didn't love this as much as I wanted to. I do have one more of her books actually, so I do plan on reading that. And then she also has like a book of fairy tales that I'm dying to get my hands on. That's the one that I'm like really, really interested in. So, but yeah, I just didn't really love this. If I was gonna recommend a work from her right now, it would definitely be The Bloody Chamber over this. And the last book that I read was Bone White by Ronald Malfi. This was my first book that I had ever read by him. This was another horror. And this one was about a man. He's got a twin. Him and his twin are definitely kind of opposites. And in, the last couple of years, they've kind of drifted away from each other. However, his brother got in trouble and was really trying to, find himself again, and ended up in Alaska, in a very remote location, just doing some hiking. And so he's been kind of keeping in touch with his brother as he goes into this very small town, and all of a sudden he just cuts off contact, and his brother's like, what the heck? So he goes missing. A couple of years later, there is a mass grave found of a ton of people in the small area, in the same area that this man's brother disappeared. And so he's like, that's gotta be my brother, right? One of them has to be my brother. Well, it's not. And so he makes it a mission to go up to this remote location and figure out what's going on. And as he gets into the town, realizes that something is not right here. And that's all I'm really gonna say about the plot. I did very much enjoy his writing. Again, atmospherically, he did a really good job of bringing you into that location and making you feel this sense of dread, this sense that something really isn't right here, but you can't really put your finger on what. It feels like there is this supernatural element to it as well, because you're not really sure, is this the townspeople that are pulling the strings, so to speak, or is there something a little bit more sinister that's lurking behind the woods? I think that I would have enjoyed this book even more if I had read it in the middle of winter, but subsequently we're pretty much in spring at this point. But moral of the story is I did really enjoy it, and I do have, I think, a couple other books. I did check that one out from the library on audio, but I do have a couple of his other books on my shelves as well. So I'm really looking forward to getting to those now that I've actually read one of his books. So those were the books that I read this month. Have you read any of them? Did you like them? How did you feel? Comment down below and let me know. However, remember to please keep it spoiler free for those who have not read it. If you do want to talk spoilers, you can find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and Instagram. All of those links can be found in the down bar below. If this is your first time here, hi, hello, and welcome. If you like what you see and you want to see more, you can click thumbs up. You can hit subscribe if you haven't already. And you can also hit the little bell to be notified when I do upload. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.